I used to think the worst thing that ever happened to me was watching my mother burn alive in our house fire. I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing my father never lost her at all. He killed her. And then he came for me. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. And if you've ever felt like the people who should protect you are actually your biggest threat, smash that like button and subscribe. Because this story will show you that sometimes the only way to survive a monster is to become something they never expected. I was 19 when my mother died in what everyone called a tragic accident. The fire started in our kitchen around midnight, a gas leak, the investigators said. I can still smell the smoke that filled our hallway like a thick, choking blanket. I can still hear her screaming my name from her bedroom. I crawled through that burning house on my hands and knees, trying to reach her. The heat was so intense it felt like my skin was melting. I made it to her room, grabbed her hand, and tried to pull her toward the door. But the smoke was too thick, the flames too high. I had to let go. I had to save myself. She died 15 feet from safety. 4 months after the funeral, I couldn't sleep without seeing her face in the flames. I couldn't eat without tasting smoke. I couldn't breathe without feeling like I was drowning in guilt and grief. But my father. He sat in our living room every night drinking beer and watching sports like nothing had happened. Like my mother had just gone on a long vacation and forgot to come home. He told our neighbors he was devastated. He told the church he was broken with grief. But grief doesn't go car shopping with insurance money 2 weeks after your wife's funeral. Grief doesn't start flirting with waitresses at the local diner while your daughter is still crying herself to sleep every night. That was the first crack in the wall of lies I'd been living behind. Maybe my father wasn't just processing loss differently than me. Maybe he wasn't processing loss at all. By the time I turned 22, I had moved back home after finishing community college. Money was tight, and Dad said he needed help with the bills. He was drinking more heavily now, but quieter about it. He would sit in his chair and stare at the TV for hours without saying a word. He started talking about how college was a waste of money for people like us. How I should just get a job at the local factory and stop dreaming about things that were never going to happen. How I was, just like your mother, always wanting more than you deserve. I thought he was depressed. I thought maybe if I stayed close and took care of him, he might start to heal. I thought maybe I could fix whatever was broken inside him and get back the father I remembered from before Mom died. I had no idea that around this time, he had taken out a life insurance policy on me. $250,000. No medical exam required. Just a signature on a piece of paper. Except the signature wasn't mine. He had forged my name and listed himself as the only person who would get paid if I died. He told the insurance company I had a high-risk lifestyle with depression and reckless behavior. All lies. But it gave him the policy he needed. I didn't discover any of this until much later. But looking back now, that was the moment he stopped being a grieving widower and became something much more dangerous. A man with a plan. The night everything changed started like any other evening. Dad had been drinking since dinner, but he seemed calmer than usual. Almost peaceful. He looked at me across the kitchen table and said something he hadn't said in years. You know what, Sarah? We should go camping this weekend. Just you and me, like we used to when you were little. I was so hungry for any sign of affection from him that I said yes immediately. I thought maybe this was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. Maybe he was finally ready to grieve properly and let me help him heal. We drove 3 hours north to Shawnee National Forest. Deep woods, no cell phone signal, no other campers for miles around. Dad said he wanted to get away from everything and just spend time together. I believed him. We set up our tent as the sun was going down. Dad seemed almost happy for the first time since Mom's funeral. He was telling stories about when I was little, asking me about my plans for the future. For a few hours, I felt like I had my real father back. At around 10 o'clock, after the fire had died down to glowing coals, Dad stood up and stretched. Come on, kiddo, he said. Let's take a walk. There's a clearing about half a mile from here where you can see every star in the sky. I followed him into the dark woods with nothing but a small flashlight to guide our way. The path was narrow and winding, full of roots and rocks that made me stumble in the darkness. Dad walked behind me, which I thought was strange since he knew the way and I didn't. We had been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Click. The metallic sound of a gun being cocked. I turned around slowly, and there was my father pointing a pistol directly at my chest. But what terrified me most wasn't the weapon. It was his face. He didn't look angry or upset or even sad. He looked completely calm, like a man about to complete a simple task he'd been putting off for too long. "Dad!" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said in the same tone he might use to tell me we were out of milk. "But I need that money. And you're never going to amount to anything anyway." For a split second, time stopped. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears like thunder. Then survival instinct kicked in. I threw myself sideways just as he pulled the trigger. The gunshot exploded through the quiet forest like a cannon. I felt the bullet whistle past my ear so close it burned. I hit the ground hard, rolling behind a thick oak tree as he fired again. Bark exploded next to my head, showering me with splinters. "Sarah! Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. I didn't wait to hear what else he had to say. I pushed myself up and ran deeper into the forest, zigzagging between trees like a hunted deer. My legs pumped so hard they felt like they might snap. My lungs burned as I gasped for air. Behind me, I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth, following my trail. His flashlight beam swept back and forth, sometimes catching my shadow as I ducked behind another tree. The light would get closer, then I'd change direction and disappear into the darkness again. A branch whipped across my face, slicing my cheek open. I felt warm blood running down my jaw, but I couldn't stop. Thorns grabbed at my clothes like claws, tearing holes in my jeans and ripping the skin on my legs. My ankle twisted on a hidden root, sending sharp pain shooting up my leg, but I forced myself to keep moving. I could hear him getting closer. His heavy breathing. His boots snapping twigs with each step. "You can't run forever, honey," he called out, his voice sickeningly sweet. "These woods go on for miles. You'll get lost and die out here anyway. At least this way it'll be quick." That's when I saw it, a massive fallen tree, probably knocked down in a storm years ago. It was lying at an angle against some rocks, creating a small cave-like space underneath. Without thinking, I dove under it, scraping my back on the rough bark as I squeezed into the narrow opening. I pressed my hand over my mouth to muffle my panicked breathing and tried to make myself as small as possible. Through a gap in the branches, I could see his flashlight beam sweeping back and forth as he searched for me. "Sarah!" he called, and his voice was so close I could have reached out and touched his boots. "Come on out, sweetheart. Daddy's not mad at you. We just need to finish our talk." I held my breath until my lungs felt like they were going to explode. A spider crawled across my face, but I didn't dare move to brush it away. I could feel bugs crawling on my arms and legs, but I stayed perfectly still. He stood right next to my hiding spot for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. I could smell his cologne mixed with gunpowder and alcohol. I could hear him muttering to himself as he searched. "Where did you go, you little brat? You can't hide forever." Finally, his footsteps moved away, and I heard him calling my name from farther and farther distances as he searched other parts of the forest. "Sarah! Come on back, honey. We can talk about this." I stayed hidden under that tree all night, shaking with cold and terror and the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life. My father, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and held me when I cried about boys, had just tried to murder me for insurance money. As the sun came up, I realized 3 things that changed everything. First, my father was not the man I thought he was. He was a killer who had probably murdered my mother and was now trying to kill me. Second, if I went to the police with this story, who would believe me? It would be his word against mine, and he had already started building his alibi. Third, if I wanted to survive and get justice, I was going to have to disappear. I walked barefoot through those woods for 6 hours until I found a park ranger station. My feet were bloody, my face was cut up, and my clothes were torn to shreds. The ranger took one look at me and called for an ambulance. While I was getting stitched up at the hospital, I found out that my father had already filed a missing person report. He told the police I had been acting depressed lately and had run off into the woods during an emotional breakdown. He said he had spent all night looking for me and was worried I might hurt myself. When the detective asked if he had any reason to harm me, my father broke down crying and said, "Officer, she's all I have left in this world. I would die before I let anything happen to her." I watched the interview on a nurse's phone, and that's when I understood that the system would never save me. My father was too good at lying, too good at playing the victim. If I wanted justice, I was going to have to get it myself. So I did something my father never expected. I disappeared. But not to hide. I disappeared to hunt. I changed my name legally with help from a women's shelter in St. Louis. They helped me get a new social security number, new identification, everything I needed to become someone else. On paper, Sarah Mitchell was still a missing person. In reality, I had become someone much more dangerous. I spent 2 years learning everything I could about insurance fraud, document forgery, and evidence collection. I got a job at a private investigation firm and learned how to track financial records and phone calls. I made friends with people who knew how to recover deleted emails and trace digital footprints. Most importantly, I learned how to get my father to confess. I bought a cheap phone and used voice-changing software to call him, pretending to be from the insurance company. I told him they were ready to process his claim on my policy but needed to verify some details first. "Mr. Mitchell," I said in a professional voice, "we just need to confirm that your daughter has been missing for the required time period." "It's been over 2 years now," he said without hesitation. "That money should be mine. I've been waiting long enough. And you're absolutely certain she's deceased? Look, she ran off into those woods and never came back. She was always unstable, just like her mother. People like that don't survive on their own." He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. No grief, no pain, just cold calculation about how much money he thought he deserved for my death. I recorded every word. But I wasn't done yet. I had also hired a private investigator to track down the forged insurance documents. We found emails between my father and a shady insurance broker about handling the paperwork for my policy. We found bank records showing suspicious cash withdrawals around the time the policy was created. Most damning of all, we found evidence that he had done this before. Medical records showing my mother had been heavily sedated the night she died. Gas company records showing someone had tampered with our kitchen stove just hours before the fire. Life insurance payouts that my father had collected and spent on gambling and alcohol instead of on my education like he told everyone. My father wasn't just a failed murderer. He was a serial killer who had been using his own family as a retirement plan. When I had collected enough evidence to bury him, I sent everything to 3 places at once: the State Insurance Fraud Division, the local police department, and an investigative journalist who specialized in cold cases. The police arrested my father at his job 2 days later. The local news showed footage of him being led away in handcuffs while his co-workers watched in shock. When the reporter asked him for a comment, he looked directly into the camera and said, "This is all a terrible mistake. I loved my daughter more than life itself." But by then, the journalist had already published the full story, including the audio recording of my father's confession. No one believed his act anymore. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in the front row every single day, watching my father realize that the daughter he thought he had killed was very much alive and had spent 2 years building the perfect case against him. When he finally saw me on the first day of testimony, his face went completely white. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. In a way, he was. The naive, trusting girl he had tried to murder in those woods was gone forever. The woman who had taken her place was something he had never imagined I could become. The jury found him guilty on all charges: attempted murder, insurance fraud, and after they reopened my mother's case, first-degree murder. He got life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the sentencing, I stood up and walked out of that courtroom knowing that I had done something most victims never get the chance to do. I had looked my monster in the eye and watched him realize that he had created his own destruction. The girl who trusted everyone was dead. But the woman who trusted no one had given me back my life. Here's what I learned from all of this. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they make you breakfast and drive you to school and sit next to you at funerals. Sometimes they tell you they love you right before they try to destroy you. But monsters all have one thing in common: they underestimate the people they try to break. My father thought killing me would solve his problems. Instead, it created the one person in the world who would never stop hunting him. What's the most shocking betrayal you've ever experienced? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, absolutely destroy that like button and subscribe for more true crime revenge stories. Hit that notification bell because trust me, we're just getting started. Remember, sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something they never saw coming.